Arizona Territory, June 1883. The sun had no mercy on the desert station at Gila Bend, and by the time the noon heat settled over the cracked earth, the only thing moving was the dust. Lietta Thorne sat alone on the bench outside the telegraph shack, her wedding dress folded neatly in her lap. It had yellowed some during the wait 6 days now, but she kept it clean, kept it close. Her fiancé was 2 weeks late. No telegram, no word, just silence and the wide, empty desert. A single horse crested the ridge just beyond the station platform. Lietta stood, squinting into the gold haze. It was not the man she was supposed to marry, not even close. The stranger rode in with the posture of someone who had seen too many miles and trusted too little. His hat was pulled low, a rifle tied behind his saddle, his shirt dark with sweat and trail dust. But his eyes, when he looked directly at her, were clear and steady. He dismounted with slow purpose, boots crunching across the packed dirt. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and even. "You waiting on someone?" Lietta straightened, her voice catching. "I was." He should have been here by now. The cowboy tied his horse to the post and looked around. Not much out here except sun and silence. "I noticed," she said quietly. He glanced at the station building, then back to her. "Name's Kade Zeller, heading west. Thought I'd water my horse and get a bite." "You from around here?" "No," she said. "I came from Kansas. I was supposed to meet my fiancé. He sent for me, said we'd start a new life near Phoenix." Kade's gaze was unreadable. 6 days late," she nodded. "I waited in town, but the innkeeper said I had to leave yesterday." "I have nowhere else to go." Kade exhaled, then reached into his saddlebags, pulled out a canteen and held it out. "You look like you could use this." She hesitated, then took it with a soft, "Thank you." He sat on the edge of the bench beside her, not too close, but not far enough to feel like a stranger anymore. Lietta noticed the slight tremble in his hands when he removed his gloves. Something about him seemed worn down, not just from the road, but something deeper. "You always ride alone?" she asked, more to fill the quiet than anything. He nodded. "Mostly. I do some cattle driving, some escort work. Whatever pays and keeps me moving." "Moving from what?" Kade gave a dry chuckle. "That's a long story. What about you? Leaving Kansas must have taken some courage." "My parents passed last year," she said. "There wasn't much left for me there, my fiancé." "Well, I thought he might be something solid." Kade's jaw shifted. He sounded like a man who made promises he could not keep. She looked down at her dress, then folded it tighter. "I do not know what to believe anymore." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the creak of the windmill and a hawk crying high above. When the sun began to dip low, Kade stood. "You should not stay here overnight, not safe. Come with me." "I will ride east a ways, camp just past the butts. I have an extra blanket and enough beans to share." Lietta hesitated. "I will not touch you," he added. "You have my word." She studied him. Something in his voice, quiet and firm, made her believe him. "All right," she said. But only until morning. They rode in silence under a sky that turned violet and gold. The desert stretched wide around them, empty and raw. Kade led her to a narrow canyon where rock walls offered some shelter from the wind. He built a fire with dried mesquite and cooked dinner in a dented tin pot. Lietta sat across from him, knees drawn to her chest. "Why are you really out here, Kade?" He stirred the pot once, then looked at the flames. "I lost someone, 5 years ago, my wife and my little boy. Fever took them both in 3 days. I kept running after that, figured staying still meant feeling it too much." Lietta's chest tightened. "I am sorry," Kade gave a small nod. "You do not need to be, you did not cause it, life just decides things sometimes." She looked at him as the fire cast shadows across his face. "Seems like we both got left behind." He met her eyes. "Maybe, or maybe we were meant to meet here." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of creosote. Lietta looked away, her heart beating faster than she liked. She barely knew this man, but there was something in the way he looked at her, not like she was broken or abandoned, but like she mattered. They slept on opposite sides of the fire that night. By morning, something had changed. Over the next few days, Kade did not leave. He helped her gather water, kept watch for riders, and stayed close without crowding. Lietta found herself waiting for his voice, watching for the way he tied his horse or squinted into the distance. He spoke little, but when he did, it mattered. One afternoon, 3 men rode into the station. Lietta stiffened as they dismounted, their eyes crawling over her like snakes. Kade stepped in front of her before they could speak. "Keep riding," he said. The tallest man laughed. "We just want to talk to the lady." Cade's hand settled on the butt of his revolver. "I said ride on." The tension cracked like lightning. The strangers hesitated, read Cade's stance, and after a moment of dead silence, turned their horses and left. Lietta stood frozen. Kade turned to her, his hand falling away from the Colt on his hip. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "I would have been in trouble if you had not been here." "Not on my watch." She stared at him. "Why do you care?" His voice was low. "Because someone should." That night she sat closer to the fire, and closer to him. By the 6th day she knew her fiancé was not coming. Kade knew it too. He never said it, but she saw it in the way he looked at her with something like sorrow, and something else, something warmer. That evening she handed him the folded wedding dress. "I do not need this anymore." Kade looked down at the lace and ribbon. "You sure?" She nodded. "I do not want to wait for a man who never planned to come." He looked at her, and for the first time he touched her hand. Just a light brush of calloused fingers. "I will get you to Phoenix," he said, "or wherever you want to go." "I want to go with you," she said quietly. He blinked, surprised. "You sure about that, Lietta?" She smiled. "You brought me something better than gold, Kade." "You brought me deliverance." His throat worked. "I did not expect you." She leaned in, just close enough for him to feel her breath. "Neither did I." And for the first time in years, he kissed someone with hope in his chest. They fell asleep that night under the stars, not apart but together. And the desert was no longer empty. At first light, the canyon walls were streaked in rose and rust. A cool breeze skimmed the floor of their camp, and Lietta stood brushing out her hair with her fingers, watching the sky shift. Kade had already saddled the horses, moving with quiet intention as though he'd been up for hours. She hadn't slept much. Her mind had wandered through strange places, places where she could picture a life with this man, one that wasn't borrowed or broken, one she could build from her own choosing. "You sleep at all?" Kade asked, adjusting the straps on her pack. "Little," she said. "Dreams wouldn't leave me alone." He tied off the last cinch and glanced at her. "Bad ones?" "No," she said, tipping her head. "Just full of questions." They rode out without another word, the horses' hooves muffled by the sandy wash. Neither of them mentioned direction. Kade turned north by instinct, and Lietta followed without asking why. The morning passed in silence, the kind that didn't press, didn't fill with things that didn't need saying. By mid-afternoon, they came upon a dry creek bed where cottonwoods clung to a scrap of shadow. Kade dismounted first, leading his horse to a patch of brittle grass. Lietta followed, lifting her skirts slightly to step over a tangle of roots. "How do you always know where to find water?" "I don't," he said, "but horses do. You just have to listen when they hesitate." She crouched beside the shallow pool, dipping her fingertips into the warm surface. Would have never thought to trust a horse over a map. Kade took a seat on a flat rock, pulling a strip of jerky from his saddlebag. "Maps lie. Horses don't." She studied him, the way the sun painted the ridge of his cheekbone, the way he chewed slow and steady, as if he'd learned the value of patience from more than just the trail. "Do you miss being settled?" she asked. "A home that doesn't shift with the wind." His chewing slowed, and he looked toward the horizon. "Used to think stillness was a kind of trap, but I reckon I just didn't know what to do with peace when I had it." She sat beside him, keeping her gaze on the water. "And now, I think maybe I was waiting for something worth stopping for." The heat between them wasn't sudden, it had been building, quiet and steady, but now it hummed low and sure like a current beneath the surface. Lietta leaned back on her palms. "I'd like to stop somewhere green. With trees that don't have to fight for every drop." "There's a place like that near the Verde River," he said. "Old ranch land, abandoned since the war. I passed through 2 years back. Could you find it again?" "I could try." She turned her head, studying the line of his jaw. "You ever think about starting over?" His voice was low. "Every day." They didn't speak again until sundown, when they made camp near a stand of mesquite. Kade gathered wood while Lietta found stones to ring the fire. They worked without needing to direct one another, each movement fitting into the others like a well-learned rhythm. As the stars blinked to life above them, she sat cross-legged, sewing a tear in her sleeve. Kade leaned against his saddle, watching the sky. "Did you ever think you'd be riding with a stranger through Arizona?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Stranger doesn't feel like the right word anymore." He looked over at her, something unspoken softening his expression. "I've been thinking about what you said." "About stopping." She set the needle down. "And I'd stop for you." The fire cracked between them. Lietta didn't look away. "I'd want to build something that didn't vanish when the wind changed," she said. "Something that lasts." Kade stood, brushing the dust from his trousers. He crossed the space between them and crouched beside her, close enough that she could smell the faint leather and sweat on him, the scent that had begun to feel like safety. "I don't make promises I can't keep," he said. "But if you're willing to try, so am I." She reached up, fingers grazing his jaw. "I want to try." Kade bent his head, slow and certain. Their lips met with the quiet finality of a door being closed behind them, a chapter ending not in sorrow but in choice. When they drew apart, Lietta rested her forehead against his. "We'll need supplies," she said, "if we're to head toward Verd." "I know a man in Wickenburg," he said, "owes me a favor." She nodded. "Then let's go there first." He stood and offered her a hand. She took it, and together they faced the fire, the stars, the road ahead. The path wasn't easy. But it was theirs. The trail east to Wickenburg cut through low hills and dry washes where Palo Verde trees clung to the thin red soil. Kade rode ahead, guiding them along a less used cattle track where the ground held fewer prints, safer from eyes that meant harm. Lietta rode behind, her back straight, her hands steady on the reins, though she had never ridden this far before. By the fourth day, the slope of the land turned rockier, and they passed a line of dead junipers struck by lightning seasons ago. The air shifted cooler, pressed with the scent of stone and ironwood. As they paused near a ridge for water, Lietta dismounted and stretched her legs, lifting her skirts slightly to climb the incline. She reached the top and crouched, looking out over the valley below. Kade joined her after a moment, his bootfalls quiet behind her. "You see that line of cottonwoods?" he asked, pointing toward a narrow ribbon of green in the distance. "Hassayamper River runs through there. Wickenburg's about a day past it." She nodded. "Looks like a place someone could belong. There's a livery on the north end of town owned by a man named Ezra Keeley. We worked together when I rode for the Prescott Mail. He'll give us fair prices." She studied the land again, then turned to face him. "Have you told anyone else?" "About what happened to your family?" Kade looked away. "No, why me?" He picked up a stone and turned it in his hand, the edges worn smooth from time. "Because you didn't flinch." Lietta didn't speak for a long time. The wind tugged at her loose hair and she let it, her eyes never leaving his. "You ever think of burying the past?" she asked. "I tried," he said, "but it kept following me." She took the stone from his hand and placed it gently on the ground. "Maybe it's not meant to be buried. Maybe it's meant to be carried, just not alone." They camped beside the river that night, where the reeds whispered along the banks and frogs called from the shallows. Lietta knelt by the water, washing her hands and face while Kade unpacked the dry goods. "I want to learn how to shoot," she said, watching her reflection ripple. Kade paused, then looked over at her. "What brought that on?" "I don't plan to be helpless again," she said. "Not in the way that makes you wait for someone who never comes." He nodded once. "We'll start tomorrow." "I've got a spare revolver. It kicks, but it's reliable." She dried her hands on her skirts, then joined him by the fire. "Will you teach me to ride the way you do, like you trust the horse knows the road more than you do?" He smiled, faint and real. "You'll be riding circles around me by summer." That night they lay beneath a sky thick with stars, and Lietta turned toward him, the edge of the blanket between them. "What was her name?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. "Mara." She traced a shape in the dust beside her. "And your son?" "Illy." "He was 3. She didn't offer pity, only silence and the steadiness of her breath near his. In the morning, they rose early. Kade showed her how to hold the revolver, how to brace her wrists, how to breathe before the pull. The first time she fired, the shot went wide and startled a bird from the brush. The second time, she clipped the edge of the can they'd propped on a log by noon. She hit it clean. You're learning fast, he said, reloading for her. I only need to learn once, she said. When they reached Wickenburg the next day, the streets were busy with freight wagons and mule teams. Dust clung to the air, and the sun glinted off tin roofs and angled windows. They rode past a group of miners haggling over tools and a woman sweeping her stoop with a baby tied to her hip. Kade led them around the edge of town, toward the livery with a weathered barn and a sign that read Keeley and Sons. A tall man with sunburned cheeks stepped out of the open doors, wiping his hands on a rag. Well, I'll be, he said. Kade Zeller in the flesh. Kade dismounted. Ezra? Ezra looked past him to Lietta, then back again. You bring trouble or something better? Kade gave a slight shake of his head. Neither, just need supplies, maybe a trail map if you've got a recent one. Ezra nodded once. Come on in. You're welcome to clean up and rest a spell. Inside the barn, Lietta watched as Ezra handed over a wrapped bundle and pointed out a few trails on a map pinned to the wall. Kade listened closely, asked about flash floods and trail closures, things Lietta hadn't thought of. When they stepped back outside, the sun was lowering behind the hills. There's a boarding house 1 street over, Ezra said. Mrs. Holloway runs it. She'll give you a fair rate for a clean room. Kade looked to Lietta. You want to stay in town tonight? She considered the question, then looked toward the open land beyond the rooftops. I'd rather be halfway to that abandoned ranch by dawn. He gave her a nod. Then we ride at first light. They left town with 2 new blankets, a sack of beans, and a tin of lye soap. As the orange light of evening stretched across the land, Kade reached over from his saddle and took her hand, just for a moment. You still sure? He asked. She looked at him, her eyes steady. I've never been more sure of anything. They rode together into the gathering dusk, toward a place neither had seen in years, but both could feel in their bones. Whatever waited for them on that land, they'd shape it together. And this time, they weren't arriving empty. The trail narrowed between 2 low ridges as the sun climbed, casting long shadows that softened the hard edges of the desert. Kade rode with a quiet focus, his eyes sweeping the scrubland ahead, while Lietta guided her horse behind him, fingers light on the reins. The silence between them had changed. It no longer held uncertainty, only the weight of purpose. By mid-morning, the land began to rise, and with it came the scent of pine carried on a breeze that cut through the heat. They passed a rusted fence line half swallowed by brush. The posts leaned like old men, brittle and forgotten. Kade slowed and pointed with his chin. That ridge marks the old boundary. The ranch house should be just beyond. Lietta leaned forward in the saddle. You think it's still standing? Last time I passed through, it had 4 walls and a roof. That's more than most. A hawk wheeled overhead, casting its shadow across the trail. They rode on another half-hour before the trees thickened, and the ruins came into view. The main house, a single-story adobe structure, had sunk slightly on its west side, but the chimney still stood. Fence rails lay scattered near the corral, and the well sat capped with a rusted bucket beside it. A stable leaned hard to one side, only 2 walls remaining upright. Lietta dismounted and walked the length of the yard, her boots crunching over dry grass. She pressed her hand to the wall of the house, feeling the warmth soaked in from the sun. It feels like it's been waiting, she said. Kade unsaddled the horses and let them into the corral space where a few tufts of grass still clung to life. Everything out here waits. The land doesn't rush. They stepped inside the house. Dust lay thick on the floor and a broken chair leaned in the corner. A stove sat rusted in place, its pipe still hooked through the wall. Lietta ran her fingers over the edge of the hearth, finding a nail driven into the mantel with a length of frayed string still tied to it. There was a family here, she said. Kade nodded. German immigrants. They tried to raise cattle. Drought hit hard. After that, no one stayed long. Lietta turned to him. Then we'll be the first to make it hold. They worked until dusk. Kade cleared the corral fencing, stacking what could be salvaged. Lietta swept out the house with a bundled sage branch, shoving debris into the yard. She found a cracked washtub behind the stable and set it near the well, scrubbing it clean with sand and water. As the light faded, they sat on the front steps with tin bowls of beans and hard bread warmed over a small fire. I saw a few peach trees behind the house, she said. Wild but strong, they'll bear again if we tend them. Kade leaned his forearms on his knees. There's a spring a mile north. If we clear the path and lay pipe, we won't need to haul from the well all summer. She looked at him, the firelight catching the side of his face. You ever think you'd build again? I thought I didn't deserve to, he said. Lietta reached for his hand, not softly, but with the weight of someone who had chosen. You do. He looked down at their fingers, then back at her. You make me believe it. That night they laid out their bedrolls beside the hearth. The wind whispered through the cracks and the scent of mesquite clung to their clothes. Kade built a fire in the old stove, coaxing the flame until it caught and the room warmed. Lietta watched the flames flicker, her voice low. I want to plant corn and beans. Maybe sunflowers along the edge. He sat beside her, knees bent, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. We'll fence off the garden first, keep the mule deer out. Outside, a coyote called high and distant. She turned to him. If you stay, I'll be yours. Not as a bride who waited for someone who never came, but as a woman who found someone who did. He didn't speak. He stood, crossed the room, and returned with something wrapped in oilcloth from his saddlebag. He knelt in front of her and unwrapped a silver ring, simple and worn, with a small turquoise set flush into the band. It was my mother's, he said. She never had much, but she kept this when everything else was gone. Lietta looked at it, then at him. You sure? She gave it tomorrow when we married. I kept it after. I thought it was an ending, but maybe it's meant to be a beginning. He slid it onto her finger. It fit as though it had waited for her. She cupped his face in both hands. Then let's begin. When they kissed, it was not desperate or uncertain. It was the kiss of people who had chosen each other not in the absence of pain, but through it. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a hymn. And in the quiet house, they found the first peace either had known in years. The land would be hard, the seasons unforgiving, but they would rise with it together. The first rain came 2 weeks after they settled. It didn't last long, a thin, slanting shower that barely soaked the ground, but it was enough to ease the dust from the air and leave the scent of wet mesquite hanging over the land. Lietta stood barefoot in the doorway, watching the droplets slide off the edge of the roof and darken the patchy earth. Kade came up behind her, his hands rough with work, and rested one palm lightly on her waist. We'll need to add a slope to the roof, he said. Catch the runoff for the barrels, she nodded. If we get enough rain by midsummer, I can plant squash along the south fence. The soil's soft there, and it gets more shade come afternoon. He brushed her hair aside and kissed the back of her neck. We'll have a good harvest season, he said. Might even have enough to trade at the Verd outpost. They spent the days rebuilding one board, one nail, one fence post at a time. Kade split lumber from fallen juniper and straightened the stable walls by hand. Lietta patched cracks in the adobe with a mixture of clay and straw, her arms streaked with dust and her skirt hem stiff from the work. She hung lavender in the windows and tied bundles of mint to dry near the hearth. In the evenings, they ate by lantern light and read from a weathered book of Psalms Kade had found in the barn rafters. One morning, she found a set of shallow paw prints near the chicken coop coyote. Kade strung wire along the posts and set a bell trap on the gate. At dusk, he showed her how to reload the rifle and keep the powder dry in the damp air. Out here, he said, it's not about being prepared once, it's about being prepared always. Lietta looked up from the gunstock. You think you'll always carry that worry? I think it's part of me now, he said, but it doesn't own me anymore. The days lengthened. The air grew thick with heat and the hum of bees. One afternoon, Lietta returned from the river trail carrying a bundle of wild onions and found Kade on one knee in the garden space, turning the soil with a crude hoe. He looked up, sweat darkening his collar. There's good depth here, he said. Roots'll take strong. She set the onions down and knelt beside him, digging her fingers into the warm earth. You ever wonder how deep people can grow? He leaned back on his heels. I think they grow as deep as they're allowed. Then let's not stop each other, she said. He pulled her close, kissing the side of her head, then her temple, his hands still caked with soil. I wouldn't know how. By early August, the house had a new roof, the stable stood square, and the garden rows held the first green shoots. Kade had built a bench beneath the cottonwood that shaded the eastern side of the yard. In the long evenings, they sat there with their boots off, her head resting against his shoulder as he traced lazy shapes over her knuckles. One night, as crickets sang and the sky turned violet, Lietta whispered, "I want to be your wife." Kade turned slowly, searching her face. "You already are, in every way that counts." "I want it said aloud," she replied. "I want to stand with you and put our names together." He laced their fingers. "Then we'll do it proper." They rode to the mission church 2 valleys over, where an old priest with a white beard and a crooked shoulder married them beneath the open sky, the Bible resting on a flat stone. Lietta wore a blue calico dress she had sewn herself, and Kade wore his only shirt without patches. The priest tied a strip of woven hemp around their joined hands and spoke the vows slow and clear, his voice carrying over the hills. Afterward, they shared bread and sweet coffee with a family from the nearby settlement who had come to witness. The youngest girl gave Lietta a bouquet of sage and desert marigold. Kade tucked one sprig behind her ear, and her cheeks turned pink with quiet pride. They returned to the ranch in the cool of evening. Lietta opened the door to their home, and Kade carried her across the threshold, not out of tradition, but because he could, and she laughed so freely it caught something in his chest and held it still. That night they lay wrapped in each other, the air heavy with heat and promise. Outside, the coyotes kept their distance and the land lay still. Years passed. Kade built a second room off the house the following spring, just after the last frost. Lietta stitched curtains from muslin and painted the doorframe with a border of blue-green swirls, the color of the turquoise in her ring. Their first child, a daughter, was born the next fall, just as the leaves turned brittle and gold. They named her Mara, and her cry was strong from the first breath, her eyes dark like her father's. Kade held her close, his hands trembling. Lietta watched him as he whispered her name against her tiny cheek. "I thought I'd lost everything," he said. "But I was just being led home." They raised chickens, kept goats, and traded preserves and eggs for cloth and coffee. Lietta taught Mara to read by the firelight, and Kade showed her how to saddle a horse before she turned 6. They planted apple trees along the edge of the ridge. By the time the girl was old enough to climb them, the branches bowed heavy with fruit on summer nights. They strung lanterns between the porch posts and danced barefoot in the yard. Kade's hand steady at Lietta's waist, the music of laughter and cicadas filling the dark. Their life was not easy. But it was full, and it was theirs forever.